Hey, everybody, welcome to Tip of the Spear this week. And as always, we're trying to bring the best voices around the world to weigh in on what's going on, not only here in America or the West, but also what's going on in Israel. It's important for us as we support Israel and we lift them up in prayer about what's happening over there with Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, all the surrounding enemies of Israel. We want to know what's happening. We don't hear it from our news groups here in America. A lot of it is propagandized, as you guys know. But that's why we want to tap into those who are on the ground there in Israel and get a real life perspective on the developments that are happening. And so today, who I'm bringing on is somebody we got in contact with one of our groups that went to Israel. And we got a hold of Dr. Nir Boms, and he's a Middle East expert researcher at Tel Aviv University at Moshe Dayan Center. He leads key programs on regional cooperation and Gulf-Israel relations. He helps coordinate workshops and forums that foster dialogue across the region. And so we're getting an expert today. And so we wanted to pick his brain a little bit about Syria and the situation up there. So, Dr. Nir, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our program, my friend.
Good to be here.
Yeah. Hey, I know you're a long-term researcher in the Middle East, and so can you give everybody in our audience kind of your background a little bit, like what you're doing, the research you're doing, and your knowledge base, I guess?
Well, I'm the co-director of the program on regional cooperation. This is a program at Tel Aviv University. This program has six different really projects. One on the Gulf, one on Morocco, one on regional dialogue, a Syria desk, which I also manage. And then we do other things that you've mentioned, like dialogues, track two, and the likes. But separately from this, I mean, I've spent quite some time on Syria. My latest book is on the Syria war. I have written quite a lot about Israel's policy vis-a-vis Syria. But perhaps more important, because of what had happened, particularly in the last decade of the war, when there was some engagement between Israel and Syria, I can say that I know a few Syrians. I have a Syrian network. If between 1948 and the beginning of the Syrian war, you can count on one hand the number of Syrians ever to have been in Israel, I can count on many more hands the number of Syrians who spent Shabbat dinner at my house in Jerusalem the
Wow.
past decade. And therefore, when the war continues, and then when this new phase of Assad falling and the rise of Ahmad al-Sharah or Muhammad al-Julani, depends which name you prefer.
Yeah.
Of course, we get lots of calls from Damascus on a daily basis, including today.
Yeah. So can you kind of give us a snapshot of what's happening in Syria now? We know we've had regime change. Can you kind of walk us through how did that go about? Where did this guy al-Julani or now Sharah, whatever his name is, how did this come about? Who's behind this guy? And how come the Bashar Assad regime just rolled over? What happened in changing that regime?
Well, that's a long question, and it
Yeah.
deserves a slightly detailed answer.
Yeah.
So, to begin with, I'm not sure if it's even true to say that it's happened overnight. Although the actual time when this particular move happened really took 11 days, which is really remarkable and took many people by surprise.
Yeah.
But if you zoom out, you can look at this as the tail end of the process that began with the Arab Spring, and then later on in 2012 with the Syrian Revolution that started around March of 2012.
Okay.
And Syria has been sort of the last remaining standing bastion of the old guard. The Assads, who have been in power really since 1966 or since 1970 when Assad Hafid al-Assad the father became the president. He has been a part of the Alawite clan and the Ba'ath system. And why
Okay.
they are related? Because the Baathism, which is a type of communist, pan-Arabist ideology
Mm.
was very useful for him. It's something that started before his time, and this was an interesting mix because the people who developed the agenda were Alawites, Muslim, and Christians. That was the leading trio who created that. And for somebody like Hafiz al-Assad, who was a military officer, commander of the Air Force, a general, it was useful because under pan-Arabism and under Baathism and under communism, everybody is equal.
Mm.
So you can easily argue that, of course, everybody is equal. So even if it happens to be the case that the Alawites, who are about 12% of the population, actually compose over 70% of the government and the business and the money in the country, it's okay because we're all equal. It just happens to be that Alawites have more positions, but that's all.
Okay.
And of course, the promise of the regime, of all of these regimes, I mean, similar case in Libya and similar case in some of the other Arab countries, we're not going to get through all of this, but what have they promised to their people? They've promised redemption, victory, and they promised prosperity. So they said that, we're going to bring you a better life because we are revolutionary, and we're going to bring you stability, we're going to bring you victory, and we're going to bring you to a better future. What did they deliver? Actually, none of that.
Mm.
Syria was not winning anything. Syria was not, certainly, with all the promises vis-a-vis Israel,
Yeah.
they were not able to reoccupy. I mean, they lost the Golan Heights in 1967. They were not able to take it back in 1973. And if you're looking at Syria, a country that today has 1 or 2 hours of electricity in most of its major cities,
Mm.
it's not that there's any prosperity. Certainly not after over a decade of war. And so the fact that Assad eventually lost its reign has to do not just with what happened in 11 days, but has to do with this really decade and a half of war that started against him. And
Okay.
it also has to do with not just who is behind it, but actually who is not behind it.
Okay.
Because there were two major forces that had backed the regime of Bashar al-Assad, who has
Okay.
been, in power since 2000. One is Iran, the other one was Russia. As for the Russians, they became more occupied and busy. They have their own war to handle in Ukraine. As for the Iranians, they also became busy for other reasons. I mean, the Israeli military has been working to constantly weaken Hezbollah in Lebanon, pro-Hezbollah militias, pro-Iranian militias in Syria. They've been opening an active war against them, centrally after October 7th. And Israel had to act to weaken these networks. These were the networks that supported Assad. There was another interesting thing, which may even go a little deeper, but it's important to mention. Assad felt some of this. And in the last months, the last year, he actually began to have some maneuvers that got him closer to the Sunni camp, the anti-Iranian camp.
Hmm.
And he
Okay.
went all the way into the Arab League meeting, and he spoke, and that piece actually eventually ended up being detrimental to him. Why? Because that put another issue on the table between him and the Iranians. Because the Iranians realized that he's, moving to the other side. So at the time when he needed the Iranian the most, they were not very eager to help him.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Russians were too busy with their own war to help
Sure.
him.
Sure.
And therefore, all of these factors together, the economy was, his officers were not paid. The military was not willing to lie on defense for him. So when Ahmad al-Sharah, who emerges from Idlib, which is really Turkish-based, under Turkish influence enclave in the northwest of Syria. This is where all the rebels who had these agreements, many of the Islamist rebels ended up taking refuge over there under some agreements that they were going to have their own enclave.
Mm.
And then it received some support from the Turks and from the Russians. When he emerges after actually quite a bit of planning, he actually sees very little resistance. The
Mm.
reason why he's able to take Syria in 11 days is not because all of his battles were heroic and very quick. It's because almost nobody was willing to fight him. He didn't have to shoot too many shots. Most of the officers who did not get paid, who did not really believe in Assad anymore for quite some time, says, you know what? Somebody else, somebody new is coming. Perhaps it's going to be a better day for us. This is something that perhaps should have happened long ago, and now it's happening. And therefore, Ahmad al-Sharah arrives, takes Syria, and all of a sudden, he ends an era of really almost 6 decades.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. No, that's a great explanation. So give us a little insight into al-Sharah. From what we hear, understand in the West, the United States had him on a terror watch list and had a bounty on him for about, I think, $10 million, I think it was. And now all of a sudden, he drops the jihadi garb and he's putting on a Western suit, cleans up his beard, and all of a sudden he's Western? Who is this guy?
Well, look, it's a good question, partially because the answer for this is not entirely yet known. And by this, I mean, we obviously know who he is. We know quite a lot about his history. But what we're trying to still assess is whether he means what he says and also whether he's able to deliver upon his vision. But let me put a bit more color here.
Okay.
al-Sharah is actually born in Saudi Arabia. His family comes from the Syrian Golan Heights. That's why his name Muhammad al-Julani. That's the name comes from the Golan Heights. His real name is Ahmad al-Sharah. And he grows up in one of the nicest suburbs of Damascus. A father, communist, very well known, and his great uncle is also very well known. He was the Farouk al-Sharah, the legendary foreign minister of Syria that worked very closely, mainly with Hafid al-Assad, the father of President Assad.
Okay.
Certainly not a jihadi upbringing.
Okay.
But within the time of the US invasion to Iraq, he begins to get radicalized. And eventually he joins the jihadi circles. This is why he eventually is affiliated with ISIS-related groups, and then with Jabhat al-Nusra, and then forms his own group, and he becomes a leader of a militia. Then you need to go into the colors of the jihadi groups themselves. They were more radical jihadis than him, but make no mistakes. He is a part of that circle, and his bounty is well deserved. And then he is moving to Idlib, along with all the other jihadi and Islamist fighters who have been fighting and lost their battle. And basically, Assad ended up taking the majority of this territory in 2018. And in Idlib, he is getting another chance to reassert leadership. And what we hear about him in Idlib is certainly an Islamist that is affiliated with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an Islamist group that is again backed by Turkey. Still, there are some nuances there as well. The Christians that exist, that coexist with him, are not persecuted. Eventually, when he goes to Khalab, he installed the Christian governor, and he now installed, he has a Christian minister in his own government. He's trying to pay some respect for that. And then his speech becomes certainly more what in the West people would call Western, because he speaks about all these ideas of equality, sharing, minority rights, religious rights. And I want to put a bit of a color here, because then there's three pieces for this triangle of al-Sharah.
Okay.
One is understanding really what he means. Second is understanding what he can deliver. And third is understanding is who is around him and really what's his role.
Gotcha.
And these three corners have some embedded tension within them. Just yesterday, we heard about new regulations that came from the Ministry of Culture, where women in Syria who would go to the beach on public beaches are not allowed to wear swimsuits. They have to wear the burkinis, the Saudi
Yeah,
style,
I've seen those.
garb. In a way, not very encouraging.
Right.
But on the other hand, there has been some more encouraging signs, which also shows that there's tried to be sort of a balance because his environment is probably more radical than him.
Hmm.
And part of what we're seeing in the context of a few other events that had happened, including a series of events in March, which was related to the coastal riots, where there was something that resembles or that can be called a massacre, where with the Alawites that was very difficult, and then eventually he said, okay, he was trying to intervene in order not to make it worse. Some of the people there were absolutely related to his circle, but what he attempted to do is eventually to prevent it. The same would happen later on with the Druze. And again, it may be a larger explanation than even this time allows, but some of the question remains here about what his intentions really are. Is he trying to do one and another, or is he trying to really initiate these types of events, respond to these types of events, or then after just respond after they happen?
Hmm.
And I think the reality is a little bit in the middle. He does not have control over all the groups and the militias. At the peak of the Syria civil war or the Syrian war, you had over 1,000 armed militias in Syria. Therefore, one of his biggest agendas has been to create a Syrian defense forces, one army, one uniform. He is calling the people, the different groups, including the Kurds and the Alawites and the Druze, to join the security force. The Druze who did not agree to do that said, we're not going to take our weapons. And that was part of the context of why they were actually fighting. The Kurds reached an agreement with him in where they would join the security force, they would join the Syrian Ministry of Defense, but they will guard mostly their own territory. So that was a part of the push and pull.
Okay.
I think that I will say the last thing on that. If you're looking for a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, I think al-Sharah, being a politician, understands something basic, which is also fundamental when it comes to a country like Syria. Syria is comprised, we have not said that before, with a number of groups. It's not united in terms of, it's a very diverse country. So you have Islamists and secularists, you have minority groups like the Alawites, like the Kurds, like the Druze, and you have other groups, which makes it more complicated after the war because there were foreign groups that were brought in, which were really proxy groups that sometimes it's difficult to control them. And I think al-Sharah understands that he needs to create a model of power sharing that potentially can work. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
That's the problems of other countries in the Middle East, which were created as really artificial countries. I mean, they used to be the province of Syria, in the times of Rome, but all of these countries, eventually there were people in the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916 or otherwise who basically just split the borders and created countries without necessarily a logic of identity and cohesion. And now you need to create a country. And he understands that if he's not going to be able to have a degree of a compromise when it comes to power sharing, he's going to get the continuation of the war.
Okay.
And that basic idea brings him to at least an attempt to create some pragmatism, because he understands that if he's not going to do that, the result will be continuation of these groups who are armed groups going one against the other.
Okay.
And so that part, I think, exists whether it's his personality or thinking, I think it exists. He understands that if he wants to really be a jihadi and attempt to create a Sharia state in Syria and completely be ideological, he'll fail. And
Okay.
we also see that with some of the discourses he had with people, not just from the West, but from our side as well, with people who engaged him and people from his team. We have conversations. And sometimes I have this interesting scene where you have a Syrian friend, people who we know for a while, and that also means that usually the circles with whom we work together, even in the time of the good neighbor, were not the Islamists. They were the more liberal part of the opposition. And he comes to you with a glass of wine, something that a jihadist, of course, or any religious Muslim is not going to dare to take at hand. And he
Right.
tells me, Wallah, saha lil Rais al-Sharah. Bless you. Cheers to President al-Sharah. And what he's saying to me by doing this, he's saying to me, Bashar is a hero. He released, revolutionized, he exonerated our country. He made our country free again. And I'm going to drink this glass in his honor, which is another way of saying he's not going to make Syria an Islamist country.
Hmm.
We are here, and we're going to make sure that's going to be the case. And it's an interesting dynamic of people dancing in a club in Damascus, something again that you cannot do if you're a jihadist or an Islamist, just simply
Right.
not allowed,
Right.
with a praise song for al-Sharah. As long as some of this is happening, there is still a chance. If the voices that calls to cancel the dress codes, separate buses, all the signs that bring Syria to the more Islamist direction, it means that the influence of the group that is more radical increases, which means that there's going to be more tensions with the minorities,
Hmm.
which means that the chances of the war to come back are growing. And that's partially what we are observing, whether al-Sharah will either reveal his true intentions, but I think some of his true intentions understand that if he speaks about Syria, he speaks about the nation of Syria. He doesn't speak in his speech about the nation of Islam. He speaks about Syria. And he's smart enough to understand that Syria can only exist as Syria if we will be able to create some model of power sharing. And of course, he comes from an Islamist perspective. We cannot take that away from him. That's a part of his DNA. Whether he will be able to be a degree of an Islamist reformer and try to succeed to create this balance is yet to be seen, and we have to take a cautious approach to it.
Yeah. He, as you know full well, he was invited to meet with Trump when Trump was in Saudi Arabia. And, there's pictures all over the internet of them meeting together and discussing things of Syria. What would you recommend if you were advising the Trump administration about al-Sharah? Um, you do think he's going to live up to his bargain with the United States and try to be a player? And I mean, Trump's approaching this whole Middle Eastern thing of maybe expanding the Abrahamic Accords to include Syria, to look at this as more of a financial thing and put away your jihadi mentality if you want to get on board with making money. Do you think he buys into that, or is this a form of taqiyya, hudna? What do you think if you were advising Trump?
Look, I want to be very careful here
Okay.
because the all these terms of hudna and taqiyya that are certainly relevant when it comes to Islamists, and this is about the double talk and the revealing your new intentions later.
Yes.
Um, so I would start. Some of this, of course, is relevant to some of the people in Syria,
Okay.
but I'll go to the other side of it as well. Uh, do we broadly, whether it's the US and Israel, have an interest that al-Sharah will succeed? I would even say that we do, if he will succeed to implement the vision he articulated. So by this I mean, We would like to see Syria having a power sharing model with the minority rights guaranteed, but also more than that, we would like to see Syria more connected to the Western axis, further away from the Iranian axis,
Sure.
and further away from other factors that could create bad influence
Sure.
or that supports bad actors. And by that, I mainly also mean Turkey, although it's kind of tricky because Trump and the Turkish president seems to be in very good terms. But I think the broad interest is that some of what al-Sharah speaks about will become more real, and policies will be implemented. So
Hmm.
if we create openness and we create engagement and we create institutions like chambers of commerce and joint projects and eventually even a different reality and the reality of agreements between Syria and its neighbors, including Israel, then perhaps we can even gain and benefit from it, and we'll push with the sanctions relief, etc. We'll push
Yeah.
al-Shara to become more pragmatist and make more concessions here. Remember that al-Shara, at this point, of course, things can change. Things in Middle history, move very quickly. There's not really a Syrian army that can pose a threat.
Yeah.
And the Syrian army, even before, did not really pose a threat. The people in Syria who posed the threat were not the Syrians so much. I mean, the Syrians were hardly a party for their own war. I mean, we've had Iranian proxies that were doing the heavy lifting of the fighting. As long as we were able to continue to support the reality and where these forces are further away, we've actually, I would say, gained quite a lot. So if the sanctions relief are basically given credit to al-Shara,
Yeah.
that credit has to do with what al-Shara will implement. If we'll see more types of massacres or killings. Again, we have to be careful here with the terms, but some of these words were used in the media again for a reason, because whether it was al-Shara driven or whether it's because the allies of al-Shara who came out with uniform and massacred or killed Alawites or afterwards Druze. It was something that was difficult to see because it should not have happened in that way. That's not the type of Syria we would like to see. But the credit that was now given to al-Shara will need to be returned first when we're seeing that Syria is changing into the right direction. And if Syria is changing into the wrong direction, and we're seeing more influences of more radical forces, I think this credit is not going to be given. There's going to be years of work in Syria before something positive can happen. And there's going to be sanctions that were removed can easily be implemented back again
Sure.
if there is a reason for it.
Sure.
So I would say that we need to tie this policy into deliverables and into seeing the Syria changing in a positive direction. I have seen a sign that was placed, I heard by an Syrian American organization. Let's make Syria great again. I would like to see Syria becoming great again. And part of Syria becoming great again is Syria that will be more respectful and thoughtful when it comes to its own people, to minorities. The issues of women and women's rights is usually one of the best predictors of moderation of a given country. So we need to see more of that.
Sure.
When you are forcing women to wear burkini for the beach, that's not necessarily the sign you would like to see. And I think al-Shara will need to understand that if his country goes in this type of direction, the sanctions will also go in the same direction. It needs to be a clear linkage between policy and between progress and between the sanction relief and the level of engagement. And that's what I would advise the Trump team to do. And that's what I hope we're also doing, in the Israeli side as well. I think we need to also push for potentially more engagement and to really explore the ideas of how to use the momentum of change and offer a base for a new model of relationship that were very different than the old ones. And since we now have a chance of a potentially new Syria, perhaps we can explore new models of relations. And that's again the potential optimism that can be offered. But of course, it requires some real policy intention on behalf of the new president and leadership of Syria. And we have yet to see if this will happen.
Yeah, you got to let it play out. So it obviously, with Syria now, I think you mentioned that. Well, let me ask you this. With the threat of Iran to Israel, does this, with al-Sharah taking over Syria, does this help Israel as far as its national security to maybe keep Iran at bay, keep them out of Syria, or what? Does this give positive protection to Israel? Because I'm always concerned about Israel's protection with whoever is surrounding them. What's your take as far as national security with this guy? Does this keep Iran out? What's your take on that?
Look, the rebellion, the Syrian rebellion, was geared at Assad and its allies.
Yeah.
Iran was an ally of Assad, and I mentioned that al-Sharah grew up in Saudi, he was born in Saudi Arabia,
Right.
and he was a part of the group that was from the Sunni side.
Yeah.
They certainly were not fans of the Iranians. That comes into even old rivalries between Sunni and Shia. Assad, being an Alawite, which is kind of an offshoot of the Shias and barely Muslim, there was a fatwa that had to be given by a Shia sheikh, the Musa Sadr, the father of Muqtada Sadr from Iraq, if that name rings a bell to some of the viewers here. He was the one who said Assad is Muslim enough to become a president of Syria because it was a part of the constitution. So he was able to be the UN of everything. All the terrorist groups could work with him equally, Sunni, Shia alike. al-Sharah is a little bit different. Zooming out, and I'm putting the big Iranian nuclear question aside for a second, because that's a separate file that is detrimental and existential and very much on the agenda of all of us, even as we speak today when we're gearing up for potential negotiations or kinetic action. Israel actually is, from a security perspective, in one of the more interesting points in the last history, because the October 7th, as devastating as it was, resulted in a significant weakening of the Iranian axis. Of course, Hamas is a fraction of what it was. Hezbollah is a fraction of what it was. It took some time for Israel to do this, but with the beepers and the taking down the leadership all the way in Tehran, in Gaza, in Beirut, and in Syria, a good number of Iranian generals of IRGC were taken down. That's again was a big pretext for the success of al-Sharah. To some degree, al-Sharah should write an open letter of thank you for Israel, because without us, I don't think he would have been able to do it.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
And now the conventional threat is a fraction of what it was. Israel is not being threatened conventionally in a significant way as it was before October 7th. Of course, we paid a very significant price for this. I will remind you and those watching that there were years where every Israeli used to carry a gas mask to protect against a potential chemical attack from Syria. And a lot of these stockpiles were destroyed only in 2013 after Assad bombed a suburb of Damascus, killed 1,500 people with chemical weapons. And he did dozens of sorties and bombardments with chemical weapons. And then there was an agreement that was brokered with the Americans, who were almost ready to bomb, and eventually President Obama said, no, we're going to have an agreement with the Russians, and part of that was taking the stockpiles out. So Israel is actually in a much better shape, broadly speaking. Of course, we still need to tackle Houthi missiles, despite of how many bombardments we are able to put there. They're steadfast and very very stubborn, and therefore there's actually a chance that after Israel asserted significant strength, for some of the allies, on the one hand, on the moderate side in Lebanon and Syria, this is okay. You know what? Perhaps we should learn something, and perhaps now we should also use the momentum given to us to take charge. And on the radical ones, to say, okay, you know what? Perhaps we should not. We should deal with Israel in a different way, because if we tried so many times to make them fall, and they ended up just taking us over, perhaps
Right.
kinetic way is not the right way. Iran has not lost the hope. It's a revolutionary ideological regime. They speak about destruction, the destruction of Israel, but they were very assertive, and what everything we've seen after October 7 was Iran related. I
Sure.
will tell you and the viewers a very interesting point.
Go ahead.
The Gaza war, the October 7th war, is now the longest war in Israel. The other longest war we had beforehand is the War of Independence. The two are somewhat analogous. They were detrimental, they were existential to some degree, the War of Independence even more. And in both wars, we had seven different fronts.
Wow.
In both wars, we had seven different fronts. But here is
Wow.
the very interesting difference. In the War of Independence, we were fighting seven different Arab armies. We did not fight the Palestinians so much. It was an Israeli-Arab conflict.
Yeah.
Even soldiers from Iraq and from Saudi Arabia and from Egypt and from Lebanon and from Syria all participated, of course, along with Israeli Arabs who later asserted themselves as Palestinians. In the Gaza war, in the October 7th war, we did not have even one Arab front, and I'll repeat it.
Hmm.
There was not one Arab army that participated in the war against Israel. Actually, when Arab armies joined the war, when they were organized Arab army, just like the army of Jordan or Saudi, they were helping under CENTCOM to prevent Iranian missiles from crossing their territory. They were fighting in many ways on Israel's side. We were fighting Arabs, but we were fighting Arabs not in the context of an Arab military. We were fighting Iranian proxies. We were fighting Iranian proxy in Gaza. We were fighting Iranian proxy in Lebanon. We were fighting Iranian proxy in Syria. We were fighting Iranian proxies funded, etc., in the West Bank. We did the same thing in Iran itself, in Iraq, and in Yemen. And these were all Iranian proxies. There was not one Arab embassy that was shut in Israel.
Wow. That's a good point. That's excellent. Wow. That's great that you pointed that out. That's amazing. You're right. So let me ask you this, Dr. Boms. Going back to al-Sharah, he's had Turkey align themselves with him. He's had Qatar backing some of this. Is that a cause for concern that Israel needs to keep their eye on? Because Qatar seems to be funding a lot of the terrorism around the world, and Turkey with Erdogan doesn't seem to be a fan of Israel. So should Trump keep an eye on that?
Well, granted, the answer is yes. And granted, number two, we rather see, a Maria Theresa type taking over Syria rather than Ahmad al-Sharah type.
Sure, sure.
With this in mind, it's absolutely a source of concern. But Turkey is not Iran,
Yeah.
and Qatar is again a very problematic player, but again of a different genre. Turkey is not a friend, and it used to be an ally, not I think anymore, but it's also not exactly an enemy. And it's a member of NATO. It is allied with the United States and with the Gulf countries. So there is some levers of potential influence. And this is why when things become, a bit, hot, there was some attempts to use third country mediators like Azerbaijan and create a little bit of order.
Yeah.
This is not something the increasing influence of like Turkey and Qatar is exactly what I was speaking about that the US policy should take into consideration because if the policy is managed correctly, it should encourage the influence of moderate factors and not of radical factors. And
Right.
it should use the levers to push the radical factors away. I hope that that's going to be the case. It may be that at some point we'll be able to see a beginning of a rapprochement because between Israel and Turkey on Syria soil, if there's going to be a way to mitigate some of the issues. And also in terms of Turkey, this is a country that had seen a lot of protests against President Erdogan. I don't think that President Erdogan is the only reality in Turkey. I think we have other voices there as well. So yes, absolutely a source of concern. But I think it's still important to acknowledge that it's a different situation. And it's a situation that also brings some opportunities with it. These opportunities do not lie with the alliance with Turkey and Iran. They lie with the more pragmatic and moderate forces. They lie with the increased influence of minorities. I think it's important, for example, that the United States will not abandon the very small military base that it has, that it will continue to support the Kurds, that it will continue to hold al-Sharah to his words when it comes to minority rights, when it comes to women's rights. I think these are the types of things that should take the lead because that will help. It will help the moderates. It will help Israel. It will help the broader push for the more pragmatic voices in Syria and throughout the Middle East at large.
No, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. I've got about 3 minutes, Dr. Boms, to our Western audience, because again, we don't get good information coming out of our news groups. We get a lot of propaganda, anti-Israel, and they never really tell us the real story. Let's just take a bird's eye view. Can you explain to a Western audience? And a lot of our audience is very pro-Israel. We're part of the evangelical wing of Christianity that supports Israel, sees a future in it. But speak to the Western audience of how important it is to understand what's going on in Israel and to understand that Israel seems to be on the vanguard for Western society.
Well, I think you're correct. And let me also use the platform to thank you and so many others because I've seen many evangelical Christians on the ground here. I've seen them where I served in uniform in Gaza. I'm a major in the IDF.
Mhm.
This is actually partially how I met your colleague
Yeah, right.
in Israel. And you're really doing God's work in many ways. And I think in that sense, God's work is actually very appropriate for this type of conversation.
Sure.
Being an Israeli, and certainly being an Israeli who deals with these issues, it means that you're going with a magnifying glass above your head. Almost
Mm,
everything you do is going to be reported and then misreported and then misinterpreted in so many ways. And in some ways, it's we are fighting, also a battle and a war of ideas. I'll just
yes.
say an interesting related point that maybe somewhat surprise, your audience.
Okay.
We are familiar with many voices that criticize Israel. We are familiar with the boycott and divestment movement.
Right.
And here is a very interesting paradox that is missed certainly in the West. And I wish that people will pay a bit more attention to this. The Durban conference of 2001 was what started the BDS conference. And since then, we've seen all these anti-Israel voices in many, many, many places. But you know where you see a little less of them and where you see these BDS pieces that exist much less?
Hmm.
Actually, in the Arab world.
Really?
Since the BDS movement started, Israel made more strides and afterwards peace agreements with a growing number of Arab countries.
Wow.
And even what we're seeing now, even when it comes to the countries like Syria and Lebanon, there are more people who are speaking with us. The debate actually is different. And in the Middle East, it is framed differently. It used to be that it was very clear that it's basically Jews versus Muslims or Israelis versus Arabs and Sunni versus Shias. But I think today it's a bit different. There is an axis of pragmatics, moderates, renaissance perhaps, and there is an axis of resistance. There are the people who still cling to the old guard, to the ideology, to this victory. We need to have a redemption and have a war at all ends, even in the price of suicide bombings and what have you. Um, the Iranians lead this from the Shia, and the Qataris, in many ways, are leaders from the Sunni, and funding a lot of these groups, not all the way to Al Qaeda, but that the group that eventually becomes more radicalized.
Yeah.
And then we have a growing number of voices in the Arab world who said, listen, we need to take care of the prosperity and the future of our children. And we understand that these radical groups cannot be a part of it. Remember that Egypt, the leader of the Arab world, when Sadat signed the peace agreement of Israel, was shunned from the Arab League. But
Yeah.
10 years later, they got back to it. And
Hmm.
afterwards, Jordan joined, and now the UAE and Bahrain. And now we're seeing all these other interesting, that's for another program, engagements. And hopefully, there's going to be more countries who
Sure.
will understand that they will do it. And of course, all of these countries in the Arab world have designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And they say that these groups cannot be. And then on the other hand, you have people in the West who says, no, we have to support the people of Gaza. Why? We support Hamas. They're saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, meaning we
Right.
don't even want to recognize Israel. Um, I wish they would have listened to some of the people in the Arab world who have
Hmm.
begun to move away from this. And perhaps one day they would. But in the meantime, I think there are people who understand it and see slightly more colors and nuances, because that's important to look at the Middle East reality. And I would like to thank all those who support us. But I want to support us not just for the sake of God's message, but also for the sake of supporting the pragmatic axis in the Middle East who cares to build a better future, not just for us in Israel, but also for all the Syrians who deserve a better future. And they need to deserve a better future not by being ruled by groups like ISIS, but being ruled by people who really care about the future and who wants to build and not to destroy.
That's right. Excellent point, man. That was great to explain that. And our take with Israel is just what the Lord said to you guys: choose life this day, or choose death. And Israel always chooses life. And if people choose life, like you said, they want economic prosperity. They want their kids to have a good life. And I hope the rest of the world catches on to what Israel is trying to do. Israel always chooses life. And we appreciate all that you guys are doing in the Middle East, because, man, without you, boy, that place would be a mess. We're so thankful that Israel's back in the land. Let me ask you this, Dr. Boms, how can people follow your work? How can they find you? Because you are a wealth of information, and I think it's important our audience tune into you.
Happy to. I mean, I have my own blog, which you can easily find if you'll Google my name. We have a program at the University of Tel Aviv, the program on regional cooperation. I'm certainly not an anonymous. You can just Google my name, Nir Boms, and thank God there are not so many of this. It's a very rare name that came from the old land of the Czech Republic.
Gotcha.
And I'll be more than happy to add anyone to my mailing list or to be in touch with you and with
Yes.
anyone else who would like to help or to be more involved.
Absolutely. So, guys, make sure you tune into him and get his information. Dr. Boms, we're going to have you on another time, man, because I ran out of time and there's so many more things I want to ask you. So we're going to try to reschedule you and bring you on a second time and a third time and just have you kind of just tell us what's going on there, because we don't get this kind of information. So we appreciate it. I know how much work it is to do all the research you're doing, to know all of this. But that blesses us. And it's important because we're fighting a propaganda war. And with the right information, truth wins out. So we appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's nighttime over there, I think, in Israel. So I've kept you up late, man. So thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you very much.
All right, brother. Take care. We'll be in touch with you.
You too.
All right. And guys, again, always tune in. We're trying to bring the best voices out in the world to bring you this kind of information. And again, check out, follow him with his information, and always tune in. Next week, we'll have another speaker that comes in and brings fresh insight, new insight, cutting edge information that keeps you guys on the tip of the spear. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time. Hey everybody, I need your help, and I need your help in 3 different areas. First of all, I need your help on our channel. Our channel is working against an algorithm, and so we need you to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And if you'll do that, that helps us get the message out to many people. It outdoes the algorithm that's working against us. So if you'll do those things, real simple, like, subscribe, hit the bell, it'll get our message out to as many people as possible. The second thing you could do to help us out is prayer. We get a lot of pushback online from not only human beings, but from the demonic realm as well. And so we need prayer. And so if you can pray for our ministry, that would greatly help us out. And third, it takes a lot of financial resources to put these programs on. And so we do a lot of filming, with a lot of editing, a lot of going on location. In fact, sometimes we film in Israel. And we film in Turkey and different places like that. So it takes a lot of money to do these special programs that we put together. And so we need finances. And so if the Lord puts it on your heart to help us, that would be greatly appreciated by us in our ministry. So those are the 3 ways you can help us. Pray to the Lord how you could do that. Real easy. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, pray, and financially support us. God bless you. Thank you so much.